Can we go ahead and begin the housekeeping comments, please?
Thank you for participating in today's meeting. Please do not connect to Zoom or teleconference while in the room, and please silence all devices. Click on the globe at the bottom of your screen to select either English or Spanish. Public comment will be taken after each item. If you are in the auditorium and wish to comment, please use the iPads located in the lobby. For meetings in other locations, please complete a blue speaker card and provide it to a South Coast AQMD employee. Speakers may be limited to a total of 3 minutes or less for all agenda items, and times may be shortened to ensure all speakers can be heard. A countdown timer will be displayed on the screen for each public comment. Word time will be allotted for Spanish translation that is not simultaneous. For questions or issues on public comment, please call the public advisor at 909-396-3247. That's 909-396-3247. Please adhere to the speaker time limit and treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being removed from the meeting. Be aware that this meeting is being recorded. By participating, you are authorizing recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the June 21st, 2024 Hybrid Mobile Source Committee meeting here in Diamond Bar. We have an agenda before us, members, with 8 items. We might have some folks at LA City Hall and other locations, the Han Administration Building out there in the Riverside in Temecula. So why don't we try a roll call at this time?
Mayor Pro Tem McCallum.
Here.
Supervisor Mitchell.
Present.
Supervisor Perez. Councilmember Rahman.
Here.
Councilmember Rodriguez. And Chair Krakow.
Here. That's a quorum?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Okay, board members. We have these 8 items in front of us. 2 of them are informational items with no motion required, where we're going to get staff presentations. And the other ones are written reports and other matters. In terms of the agenda, any changes to the agenda suggested or requested by any of the board members at this time? Okay, so we will go forward then with item number 1. Dr. Shen, update on proposed Rule 2306, freight rail yards, and proposed Rule 316.2, fees for Rule 2306. Staff will provide a summary of proposed Rules 2306 and 316.2. Proposed Rule 2306 seeks to reduce NOx emissions associated with freight rail yard operations by requiring operators of freight rail yards to meet or exceed reduction targets to ensure that emission reductions will be proportional or greater in the South Coast AQMD relative to reductions throughout California from implementation of state regulations. Proposed Rule 316.2 will establish fees for owners and operators of freight rail yards to recover reasonable costs incurred by South Coast AQMD for implementation of proposed Rule 2306. Turn this over to Dr. Shen, Planning and Rules Manager. Good morning.
Committee members, my name is Elaine Shen. I'm Planning and Rules Manager. Next slide, please. So proposed Rule 2306, as well as proposed Rule 316.2, they are scheduled to be heard by the board this year on August 2nd. And proposed 2306 is the freight rail yards rule. It is designed to achieve emissions associated with freight rail yard operations. It is part of the comprehensive suite of facility-based mobile source measures that were adopted in the 2016 and 2022 AQMP. And proposed 316.2 it is the companion rule to proposed Rule 2306. It is designed to recover reasonable costs that are expected to be incurred by our agency to implement proposed rule 2306. Next slide, please. So some updates on our recent rulemaking activities. So about a month ago, on May 17th, we released to the public what we call 75-day package. It includes our preliminary draft rule language, as well as staff report and other associated documents. And we also held in early June 2 public meetings, including public workshop, as well as a community workshop in the evening. And in the meantime, we continue to engage with various groups of stakeholders who are listed here on the slide. Next slide, please. So before I dive into the rule, I do want to emphasize that the proposed rule 2306 is not one single magic bullet that would address all the rail emissions within our region. So rather, it is one component of that three-legged stool that you see on this slide. So this three-legged stool will require the EPA, CARB, as well as our agency, to utilize our respective authority to collectively address rail emissions from rail yards within our region. So this proposed rule is designed within that context, and while also learning from our past lessons in designing this rule. Next slide, please. So last year, CARB, the California Air Resources Board, adopted 2 landmark regulations to collectively reduce emissions for the entire California state in terms of emissions from locomotives as well as trucks. So these 2 emissions are expected to achieve really significant emission reductions from both freight locomotives as well as dredge trucks. But these 2 state regulations, they are not designed in a way that would achieve or guarantee to achieve emission reductions that are proportional to the attainment needs within our region, and also not necessarily proportional to that kind of adverse impacts that our EJ communities within our region have experienced over the past several decades, if not longer. So this is where our proposed rule 2306 comes in. So it is designed to ensure that our region will do at least as well as the rest of California. And so how do we do this? Is that the rule includes emission reduction targets. So to achieve the kind of emission reductions at the facility level, as if the 2 state regulations would be implemented proportionally or more than proportionally within the South Coast AQMD region. Next slide, please. And so on this map, what you can see is the known freight rail yard facilities that are potentially subject to our proposed rule 2306. And it is the freight rail yard operator and as well as the owner who will be subject to the proposed rule. And the state or local government agencies who contract with the owner and operator would also have responsibilities within the design of this proposed rule. Next slide, please. And some key components of our proposed rule 2306. So we would be achieving NOx emission reductions for both new and existing freight rail yards. The operator of the freight rail yards that are subject to the rule would be responsible for reporting and also demonstrating the kind of emission reductions they have achieved or will have achieved for their facility to make sure that they can meet or exceed the proposed emission reduction targets that are including in our proposed rule 2306. In the meantime, we do provide flexibility in compliance. We have multiple compliance pathways designed in the rule, but all of them, they are designed to achieve significant emission reductions from each freight rail yard facilities. And we do not allow any mitigation fees or any market trading options within the design of this rule. In the meantime, we also have reporting requirements on zero emission infrastructure. And so these reporting requirements are really meant to facilitate information sharing as well as coordination in order to expedite the development of this critical infrastructure, as well as to facilitate the deployment of zero emission technologies. And So how do we do this is to remove some of the key roadblocks that we have heard time and again in impeding the development of the zero emission infrastructure. And as I mentioned before, state and local agencies will have responsibilities. So this is to add another layer of assurance, compliance assurance, so that the freight rail yards contracted with these state and local government agencies would be complying with our proposed rule. And finally, the rule has a provision to say that the rule will be effective only upon federal approval. Next slide, please. And so this rule is really years in making. And during the whole process, we have pivoted to different directions, but we have been consistently engaging with our stakeholders. And we have heard from community similar comments or similar feedbacks throughout this whole process. They are summarized on this slide. So almost all of this very key and very valuable feedback, they are used to inform the design of our proposed Rule 2306. Next slide, please. And so there are some key remaining issues that we still heard from different stakeholders and also from the recent comment letters that have been submitted to us last week and also earlier this week. So the first key issue is that the stakeholders would like us to include all the freight rail yard emission sources in our proposed emission reduction target. And so this rule is actually allows and also encourages emission reductions from all freight rail yard sources. So not only from locomotives, dredge trucks, as well as from cargo handling equipment, refrigerated transportation units, as well as other potential on-site support equipment. And in the meantime, we do set our targets to be consistent with the implementation or proportional implementation of the state rules, as I discussed earlier. And we also have heard concerns related to how the rule is going to deal with port-related rail activities. And it is the intent of this rule that the rule would not be applying to marine terminals with on-dock facilities, and it would also not apply to on-port switching operator contracted by the ports. And this is because it is our intent also that an indirect source facility will not be subject to multiple facility-based rules, especially in light of that we are currently also pursuing rulemaking for marine terminals, for marine ports as well. And we have received feedback from the ports, and we will be taking those into account to see how we can potentially add more clarifications so that our intent is clear in the rule. In the meantime, the communities have also proposed that we should really ensure that we can expedite zero emission infrastructure development and then potentially prioritize electrification of the facilities. And as I mentioned above, the rule is indeed designed to make sure that there will be sufficient level of coordination among different parties that are critical to develop this kind of infrastructure for freight rail yard emission sources. And in the meantime, our agency continues to be fuel neutral, and this is the same design for the state rules as well. And last key remaining issue is that there are also concerns about if the rule has multiple compliance pathways as well as proposed exemptions. So would there be any loopholes? So we do not believe that there's any loopholes within our design. So to be clear, the multiple compliance pathways are designed to make sure that we can achieve that kind of proportional implementation of state regulations. So all compliance pathways will lead to significant emission reductions for our region and also for our communities. And in the meantime, the proposed exemptions are really designed for those rail sites that are infrequently used. So maybe there's a very temporary operational needs to use certain sites for freight rail yard operations. And as well as sites where their emissions mainly come from captive fleets. Next slide, please. So for proposed rule 2306, the companion fee rules, so we will be looking at charging different fees in order to recover our costs of reviewing, auditing reports, as well as notifications, and then to potentially conduct inspection activities. Next slide, please. So what kind of emission reductions and also associated health benefits would we expect from the proposed rules in conjunction together with the two CARB regulations, namely the in-use locomotive regulation as well as the advanced clean fleets? So based on our very preliminary estimates, we expect that at least 9 tons per day of NOx will be achieved on average annually from the time of rule effective date. And all these 9 tons of emission reductions will be ensuring very significant health benefits that will be occurring within our region, especially for our EJ communities. And I do want to emphasize again that these estimates are very preliminary. So as we're speaking right now, we are continuing to seek refinements to those estimates, but these numbers will be in the ballpark, will not change very much. Next slide, please. So in the meantime, what kind of impacts can we expect from the proposed rules in addition to the health benefits that we discussed on the previous slide? And because the rules are designed to achieve emission reductions that will be proportional to the state regulations, the majority of those costs associated with the implementation of proposed rule 2306 are already analyzed in the cost analysis for the two CARB rules. We expect very nominal incremental costs, and most of the costs will be associated with the reporting and notification costs, as we discussed earlier. And in the meantime, because the rule is designed to implement the facility-based measures for rail yards that were adopted as part of our 2016 and also 2022 AQMD. So the associated environmental analysis have also been conducted for those AQMPs as well. And there is no additional analysis or environmental documents that will be needed for this rule. And in the meantime, the companion fee rule is exempt from the CEQA requirement. Next slide, please. And so the next step is that by July 2nd, we will be releasing the next round of our documents. That's what we call the 30-day document. And it will include our draft rule language, incorporating potential revisions, as well as supporting documents. And the rule will be brought to the board for a public hearing on August 2nd this year. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We're just having a little, do we need this to work so we can see the public commenters? Okay, yeah, okay, thank you. We're having a little technical issue up here with our computer. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Shen. And we can open this up to comment from the board members at this time or any clarifying questions before we go to public comment. We're not seeing the public comment up here on the dais, Larry and me.
We can call the public comment. We see it.
Okay, but maybe you'll let me know how many people there are and things like that.
Currently, there are 3 people with their hands raised, now 4. I
Okay.
think once you announce, now 7.
Okay. Oh, where are you seeing that? Oh, okay. All right, but well, while we're dealing with that public comment queue, why don't we open it up for comments from any of the board members, clarifying questions at this time before we go to public comment, if any?
Supervisor Mitchell has her hand raised.
Good morning, Supervisor. Please go ahead.
Top of the morning to you, Mr. Chair and members. Thank you so much, and thank you to staff for the presentation. Can you see me? Mr. Chair, can you see me?
Yes, we can see you.
And now, yes, now.
Thank you very much. Just making sure. A couple of quick questions, Mr. Chair. First of all, I appreciate the health benefit slide, and I'm clear that these are best guesstimates at this point with regard to the 9 tons per day. But I'm also hearing that the community is most interested in an independent monitoring kind of process, a way to consistently really quantify and verify the health impact of our proposed rule. So what can we provide to really help verify impacts of the rule that the community can have access to and rely on with a high level of confidence? Question to staff, please.
Good morning, Supervisor. This is Ian McMillan. Thank you for the question. We have heard the same thing from some community groups as well. What this rule does do is it does include some new reporting from railroads that are operating these facilities, pretty extensive reporting. And what we have really wanted to do is to we want to work with the community groups, environmental groups, the railroads as well, with this information that comes in so that we can make it available if the board adopts the rule, that we can make this information available in an accessible way and in a useful way. There's a lot of data here, and we've really heard from community members. They want to understand what are the operations at these facilities so that they can then see how that might be affecting them. With regards to specific health effects, that's really more something for a public health department to be looking at, or people's personal doctors, if they're looking for specific health effects. But for the information that relates to air quality, that's something that we have a lot of data we'll be collecting, and we think that there's a lot of opportunity to work in the future to design ways to make that information available to the public.
Thank you. And if I said health effects, I didn't mean that. You're right. That would be public health in one's individual position, but really how we are going to make sure that general health impacts, much like the health benefit slide, already projected lives say. So just wanting to make sure that the community has a way that they feel a high level of confidence in terms of monitoring health impact. So I appreciate your response with regard to the new and expansive reporting that this rule will bring forward. A second question, Mr. Chair, if I may. As we assume, or I will assume that CARB can and will very likely pass new rules to address additional mobile source operating at rail yards. Will we then be in a position to strengthen our emissions targets as CARB kind of makes their rule adjustments as well?
Yes, we would. I think like anytime there's new regulations, we would look at the effect of those new regulations as well as just what's happening on the ground. What's the actual turnover at the facilities? What's the incentive programs? What's the regulations? And then revisit and come back to the board at that time.
Okay. Last question for me, Mr. Chair. I understand that we've set facility-wide targets to really try to do the best we can to get our share of emission reductions. So my question is, can we also include other equipment like cargo handling equipment when we set our overall emissions reduction targets? Given the limitations we have, since we don't regulate mobile sources directly, is this something in addition we can consider?
If I can, before you answer that, just adding on, Supervisor, to that question.
Sure.
Sorry, could I just interject here? Supervisor Mitchell, would it be possible for you to repeat your question again? This is Nithya.
Sure. What I said was that I am clear that we've set facility-wide targets to make sure that we get our fair share of emissions reductions. That's the strategy we're engaging in since we don't regulate mobile sources directly, right? So my question is, can we also include other equipment like cargo handling equipment when setting our overall emissions reductions targets?
Yeah, and I was just going to add to that. If you look at page 13 of the preliminary draft rule, looks like it's section F2, Supervisor, where it describes the zero emission infrastructure reports. It also says that those reports are to take into account any other ZE infrastructure requirements and initiatives. So CARB, for example, is looking at a forklift rule this month. We already have rules for refrigerated units that we're going to build on. So looking at the rule, it would seem to anticipate the kind of things your question just asked. So I wanted to tag on to that before staff answers.
Yes, I can respond, and you took half my answer already, so great. Appreciate you providing that much better than I'm sure I can. But separate from the infrastructure, when looking at emission reductions from specific vehicle types, the rule does actually look at all vehicle types that are involved in goods movement from these facilities, whether it's the cargo handling equipment, the transportation refrigeration units, the locomotives, the trucks, et cetera. Emission reductions can come from any one of those to meet these facility-wide targets. And we recognize that railroads are likely to look at reducing emissions from any of those. I think the question is, can we set independent targets ahead of CARB regulations on these other categories? And we think really right now it's best to be consistent with what's on the books for CARB. And so that's where we're really trying to make sure that we are anchoring back to CARB's regulations, that we get a proportional fair share here, but allowing for that additional emission reduction to come from those other sources and give credit for that in this rule.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you. And just a quick follow-up on that. If we look at sort of the major sources there, again, we're just talking, if you can, in estimates or generalities. You've got the locomotives, you've got the trucks, and then you've got the rest of the stuff, mostly the cargo handling equipment. And I understand that each rail yard might be a little bit different, but can you give general estimates on how much of the NOx is coming from each of those three sources? Just a general sense of it.
Yeah, so the biggest share will be from the freight locomotives that are operated on or through those facilities, and followed by dredge trucks. So for the remainder of the emission sources, they will be accounted for a much smaller share.
Can you give me a number, an estimated number, or if you're not comfortable, fine, but can you?
Yeah, so if we put aside locomotives and dredge trucks, looking at the remainder of the sources, they will be in the single-digit numbers in terms of percentages.
But still significant. Thank you. Other questions from the board members, clarifying questions at this time before we take public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Mayor?
Thank you. Along those same lines, we say we're going to get over 9 tons per day of NOx reductions by this rule. How much of that is attributed to the locomotives? That's following up on his question. How much of that 9 tons per day is going to be locomotive generated?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And when we look at the CARB projections, it will vary from year to year. So in earlier years, we will see more emission reductions from dredge trucks. But then very quickly over time, like the majority of emission reductions will be coming from freight locomotives.
You don't have a number? How much of that 9 tons per day?
Right. So I would say on average, it would be 7 to 8 tons over the entire time horizon that we have looked at.
Thank you very much.
I know we've received some public comment on this. Maybe if I can just ask you to respond to a couple of the things that we've gotten in public comment. We received one comment letter that talked about the CEQA for this item. We are relying on the very comprehensive analysis included in our AQMD, particularly on the infrastructure piece, in large part for this rule. We received a comment letter sort of critiquing that. Do you have any response to that at this time?
And Chair, after that's answered, just wanted to let you know that Board Member Rahman has her hand raised.
We're in the process of preparing responses, so we don't have anything to disclose at this time.
Thank you. And the other comment we received from PMSA, the PMSA is concerned about sort of double counting in the rules and how the interaction is going to be for the on-dock rail at the ports with regard to this rule and a potential future port rule. I know our intent is to exempt those on-dock facilities here. But did you have a response to the comments from PMSA?
Yes, good question. So I think that the question is, if the rail activity is included in a port rule and it's also included in 2306, proposed rule 2306, how does that work? It seems like there might be some double requirements. And really what this rule is looking at is a facility-based rule. We recognize there's a lot of other rules and regulations that are out there. There are rules on locomotives on the manufacturing side. There's rules at CARB on the in-use fleet side. So you have manufacturer requirements, fleet requirements, and facility requirements. It's not uncommon that those will overlap with each other on the same emission source, but the responsibility for complying with the regulation is really what's important to look at. A fleet doesn't need to comply with a manufacturer requirement. A facility does not need to comply with a manufacturer requirement. So in the same way, a facility that is subject to proposed rule 2306 is only responsible for emissions for their facilities, not for other facilities, right? So if there's a rule that has requirements on different kinds of facilities, so for example, not for existing rule 2305, warehouses, those facilities have trucks that go from a warehouse to a rail yard. The rail yard only worries about the truck associated with the activity for the rail yard. The warehouse worries about the association of trucks at that warehouse. To the extent that they're both doing something, it makes compliance easier because if it's a zero emission truck going from a warehouse to a rail yard, hey, it checks both boxes, great. But they're only responsible for their own specific activity. They don't worry about the requirements for another facility. Same thing would happen with if there's a port rule that has any requirements that would ever touch on rail. It's the facility specific requirement. That's all they have to worry about. They don't worry about the other facilities.
Thank you. And we may hear more a comment on that. Did you have something, Mayor?
Yeah, just along the same lines, I know in the presentation it said it's not our intent that these rules apply differently, but we need to make sure that the language in the rule specifically says that somehow, even though it's our intent not to, have a double counting, if you will.
Councilmember Rahman?
Thank you. I had a question about the federal preemption issue, which was discussed in the report. I just wondered whether staff would be able to explain how the court challenges that AQMD's rulemaking around rail yards last time would not impact rules this time because of the pathway we're choosing. I think I understood it, but would love just a verbal explanation.
So, Board Member Rahman, there's probably a short answer and there's a longer answer. It might be best to just brief you individually on that issue. But the short answer is that we're looking at the relevant law and trying to make sure that we're complying with them so that the rule would go forward.
By the relevant law, you mean the CARB regulation?
Well, all the rules and laws that related to the prior litigation, which involved ICTA, and so that's one of the main focuses of how we've been designing the rule.
Okay, got it. And okay, well, maybe I can ask follow-up questions in an internal briefing on this question then. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Mayor?
Thank you very much. I think along that same line, if the EPA does not approve the end-use locomotive rule, what effect is that going to have on this rule?
There's a number of potential outcomes with that regard, and that's actually one of the questions we're asking ourselves right now. So we're looking at how can we strengthen the rule. to perhaps survive some of those type of issues. And at this point, I'd say we're looking into it and we'll have more information with regards to that in the near future.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions at this time? Okay, we'll take public comment on this. Because we have another agenda item here that requires an informational report as well as stationary source following this meeting, we're going to limit public comment to 2 minutes on this item. And we're going to open the queue.
We have 10 speakers signed up thus far.
Okay, and if we'll close the queue in 1 minute, please. And while we're ticking that clock, we'll call on the first public commenter. We have someone here in the audience, Thomas Jelinich from PMSA. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Not at all. Thank you. Good morning, Chair Krakow. Thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to be here this morning. As you've mentioned, Chair, we are deeply concerned about the construction of the rail ISR. I don't think the way Ian described it is completely accurate. Activity under this proposed rule would have activity that falls under this rule would also fall under the proposed marine ISR. I think what Mayor McCallum is asking for, a clear exemption that the activity that is regulated under this rule would not also fall under that rule, is what's necessary here. The structure of the rules of the proposed rail ISR is not cooperative with what's proposed in the what we have seen as a concept in the Port ISR. What we're concerned about is two things. One, the exemption language is not correctly written. It would bring in all the marine terminals here, and we've provided written comments on that. The second thing we're concerned about is that the structure of the rule, because it's for rail facilities outside the port complex, rail operators would have incentives to concentrate emission reductions outside the port complex. Yet, a proposed port ISR would still leave marine terminal operators responsible for rail emissions for the trips between port facilities and non-port facilities. Yet, their hands would be tied because the facilities under the rail ISR would be highly incentivized to concentrate their emission reductions under this rule outside the port complex. And so this rule creates an inherent conflict between the written language here and what has been proposed for the port ISR. And so I think Mayor McCallum's suggestion about a clear exemption, not just for the facilities, but that the activity fall under only one rule is what's needed here. And I ask that you direct staff to include that in the language. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jelinich. So staff, just please, talk with PMSA and try to get some clarity on this situation. If Mr. Jelinich and PMSA want all these activities included in a port rule that they're willing to agree to, great. But the activities have to be in a rule somewhere, one or the other. Not neither would be my feeling on it. But please do talk with Mr. Jelinich. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we will go to in person at City Hall or the Kenneth Hahn Building. Anybody?
Mr. Chair, we have no one here in the hearing room in the Hall of Administration.
Council members, is there anyone there at City Hall?
Nobody today.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go now to the electronic queue online. Dory Chandler from the Coalition for Clean Air, welcome.
Mr. Chair, respectfully note that I think the order that you have is not correct. And if you're okay with it, I can call the names.
Thank you. Let's close the queue. 2 minutes each, please.
So the first speaker is Teresa Pisano of the Port of Los Angeles.
Good morning. This is Teresa Pisano. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. I'm an environmental affairs officer for air quality at the Port of Los Angeles. We appreciate the opportunity to participate in this process, and we submitted a comment letter just yesterday to staff. The primary intent of our letter is to provide suggested language to clarify the exemption for on-port locomotive activity. As we understand it, the exemption is intended to separate the activity regulated under proposed Rule 2306 from the activity that AQMD staff intends to be regulated under proposed Rule 2304. As it's currently written, however, we believe that the language does not exempt all port rail activity that's likely to be regulated under PR 304, which would become challenging for those rail yards that could be required to comply with two rules for the same action. We offer suggested language that we believe will clarify this. We provided recommended updates to some stated definitions, and we request modifications to Section I to reduce administrative burden and permits. Thank you to Elaine for including some of our concerns on slide 9 and for the discussion on this item. Thank you to Chair Krakoff and committee members for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Yazi Kezawade. Yazi.
Hi, good morning. This is Yasi Kawazade with Sierra Club, and I'm joining you all as a campaign advisor for our national transportation team. We are excited to see staff working hard on a draft rail yard rule, again, focused mostly on Class 1 rail yard operations. I believe we can strengthen the rule further. While the rule has innovative requirements such as zero emission infrastructure, we encourage staff to clarify and require a facility-wide approach. On reporting, we can go further by requiring public disclosure of data used in compliance, reporting to hold facility operators accountable for their claims. Our coalition of EJ and environmental partners urges staff to include more robust reporting requirements with public disclosure to ensure stronger enforceability. We really appreciate Ian and Dr. Shen's hard work supporting and leading this work. And just so everyone knows, we failed to reach another ozone attainment standard this past weekend. Indirect source rules are going to be crucial in getting business as usual to clean up its act, and they will solve our public health and climate crisis impacts. The whole country is watching this agency, and we're looking forward to continue working with staff and industry partners who want to see clean air happen in nearby their neighborhoods and for their workers on docks, at ports, at rail yards, and at warehouses and at airports and new development. We're coming for all of those things, and we're really excited about the technology getting us there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Yazi. The next speaker is Fernando Gaitan. Fernando.
Good morning, Fernando Gaitan with Earth Justice. I want to just first start by expressing my gratitude to Dr. Chan and staff for working on this rule, and for Supervisor Mitchell for those excellent questions asked earlier. I want to express our strong support for passing an indirect source rule on rail yards by no later than August. This is a rule that's a crucial step towards achieving cleaner air and protecting public health in our communities and implementing the 2022 AQMD. However, we do urge the district to strengthen this rule. It's imperative that we address all sources of emissions that rail yards draw into our communities and not just focus solely on car rules for locomotives and trucks in setting the targets. Based on the 2022 AQMD, the region needs to reduce NOx an additional 67% to meet ozone attainment goals for the 2015 standard. We, however, have an opportunity here through this rule to develop a comprehensive approach to zero emission technology and infrastructure by broadening the scope of initial emission reductions targets to include all sources of emission, including such things as cargo handling equipment and TRUs and other equipment. We can significantly reduce air pollutants that contribute to respiratory illnesses and environmental degradation. This holistic approach is essential to safeguarding the well-being of the vulnerable populations in our region, including communities of color and low-income neighborhoods disproportionately affected by freight pollution. It bears repeating, this rule is estimated to prevent roughly 300 premature deaths each year and close to 2,000 ER visits annually. I urge you, board members, to prioritize public health and environmental justice in your decision-making. Let's get this rule passed in August. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernando. Our next speaker is Elizabeth Pring. Elizabeth?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you all for the opportunity to speak, and thank you so much for all the work thus far. I'm Elizabeth. I'm a legal intern at the NRDC based in the Santa Monica office. I was born in the Central Valley of California, and I've been a resident of LA for the last 4 years. It's a place that I call my home. So pollution has been gravely harming frontline communities living near ports, rail yards, and warehouses for decades. The particulate matter and ozone that these emission sources contribute to are known to lead to more emergency room visits and hospitalizations due to heart attacks, aggravated asthma, decreased lung function, restricted airways, and even premature death. Disproportionate health outcomes exist in these vulnerable areas. As a resident in this impacted area, I would like to applaud AQMD staff and AQMD governing board members for prioritizing community health and safety by advancing the port and rail indirect source rules. Nonetheless, I urge staff and board members to commit to strengthening and completing both rules this year. 2024 will mark the 8th year of the Air District's inaction in getting rules adopted and enforced to fulfill its promise to South Coast residents. Each time the Air District decides to stall on these important life-saving rules, frontline communities continue to bear the brunt of the resulting health impacts. I urge you to stand with communities and focus on passing the strongest possible rail yard and port ISRs this year and start delivering on the promise of the 2022 AQMP to realize a zero-emission future. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nina Turner. Nina?
Good morning, Honorable Mobile Source Committee members and AQMD staff. Thank you for this opportunity to provide comment on the proposed indirect source rule for the freight rail yards. My name is Nina Turner, and I'm representing the Port of Long Beach. On Tuesday of this week, the Port provided a comment letter to AQMD staff on the proposed indirect source rule for freight rail yards. It is our understanding, pursuant to verbal discussions with AQMD staff, that AQMD intends to regulate port-related locomotive activity under the Commercial Marine Ports ISR and not under the Freight Rail Yards ISR. This important distinction must be adequately reflected in the rule language. Without clear, unambiguous language, regulated entities may be responsible for mitigating the same rail activity under both the Commercial Marine Ports ISR and the Freight Rail Yard ISR. However, the exemption language as presently written does not exempt all rail activity occurring on property owned by the ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles, and therefore would result in rail activity that would be regulated by both the Commercial Marine Ports ISR and the Freight Rail Yard ISR. The Port has proposed modified rule language to address this issue in our comment letter mentioned by Elaine earlier, in addition to other changes that would help to streamline and clarify the rule. I'd like to thank Elaine and her team for meeting with the Port staff on June 13th to discuss our concerns, and we appreciate your consideration of our comment letter. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. And again, we look forward to working with you. On this point, it's very important that our staff get with the two ports. We're working well with the ports. We're doing a lot of grant funding issues together. So we really just need to vet through these issues with our port partners on this and continue this great tone that we've set going to Washington, D.C. together and stuff like that. Again, though, as the chair, all I would say is that, we need these locomotives covered. So they're either going to be in this rule or that rule. In my view, it's not acceptable that they be in neither. So, and maybe piece of it can be in one and piece in the other. But all those folks that are coming expressing concerns about rail, and its role in this rule, that's fine. But let's not forget the other side, which is that we need your buy-in that it be included in the other rule. It can't be neither. It just can't, from my perspective. Keep going there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our next speaker is Andres Salerno. Andres?
Good morning, and thank you to the board for the opportunity to speak. My name is Andrea Salerno, and I'm here with the National Resources Defense Council. I'm here today to insist that the board take action instituting railway ISRs by the end of this year. We know the cost of inactions. We have data showing the level of greenhouse gas emissions, the community health impacts, the premature deaths over the last few years. There are others better equipped to talk about the human impact of this body's lack of regulating LA's rail yards, but I'm here to insist that there is a focus on instituting the railway ISRs by the end of this year. There's been a lot of positive momentum, but there's always a risk after a public hearing that talks of voluntary measures will be sufficient. Well, that will have the potential to delay this necessary action. That will not be conducive to a clean transition. These ISRs should set aggressive targets so we can have a foundation for clean transition of LA's railways. That means zero emissions, facility-wide development plans. That's not something that's going to get done with voluntary agreements. There also needs to be transparency for frontline communities. These communities have suffered from inaction and they deserve to know what's going on. Plus, public disclosure will enforce accountability. And very importantly, these need to be very enforceable targets. There's rise for concern with the giveaways and exceptions. The obligation here is to the people. Consequences for noncompliance are necessary to protect community health. I would like to urge you, please protect LA's frontline communities and pass the strongest possible railway ISRs this year. It's time to get the job done and deliver on the promises made by this body. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dory Chandler with CCA.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you so much. Good morning, Dory Chandler, policy advocate with the Coalition for Clean Air. CCA supports the final approval of Rules 2306 and 316.2 and are grateful to the staff at AQMD for their hard work on this rule. The kind of rail yard pollution this rule will address stretches back to the 1800s. The basin's persistent extreme non-attainment of the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, a threat of federal sanctions, and the enactment of California's AB 617 highlight the need for emissions reductions. Passing a robust ISR for rail yards will help the basin achieve a reduction in smog-forming nitrogen oxides of 9 tons per day, almost 10% of what is required to meet the 1997 standard for ozone, another attainment deadline of which we just flew past this Saturday. We urge the district to implement the strongest rule possible. Proportional CARB compliance is a start, and we hope to see a rule that goes above and beyond. We want to see robust facility-wide emissions targets, including all sources of emissions at the rail yards and without off-ramps. The rules should include zero emissions infrastructure planning to coordinate with utility providers, and new rail yards should be required to start at zero emissions, and then should include public access to emissions data and monitoring. We have highlighted our additional recommendations in a letter submitted. It's already within the Air District's legal authority to implement these rules given by Congress in 1977 and confirmed in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2010. South Coast Owned Council believes that it has the authority to act this way. We understand the dance between federal and state jurisdiction, and local air districts who bear the proportional impact of pollution can regulate in a proportional way. With BNF's railroad net earnings for 2023 at over $5 billion and Union Pacific over $6 billion, and ISR will also give the market the strong signals it needs to transition to cleaner technologies. Threats of legal action should not deter our leadership for holding these dirty polluters accountable. With all the benefits that this emissions rule will address, we really believe this is a future we should aim for. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Harvey Etter. Harvey? Harvey, your phone is muted.
Hello, am I being heard?
Yes.
Okay, good morning. My name is Harvey Etter. I'm talking for myself and for the Public Solar Coalition. We only got 2 minutes. It's not enough. I want to get kind of an overview on bigger picture things. These 617 communities and stuff around the ports, around transportation, they're taking the health effects and whatnot. We're involved with litigating with that. and trying to get them to use the sunshot, which was ignored from Department of Energy, from 10 to 20 and still going on. Okay. Whenever anything goes in, 60% of new power plants that went in 3 years ago around the world were owned, controlled by fossil fuel companies. That can't happen. It can't happen here. Under CEQA, we can bring up this issue, and this, it's got to go down, okay? That local co-ops, worker-owned co-ops, local communities, unions, that are own and control this. This 40% thing coming from EPA is garbage. It's at least got to be 80 or 100. Okay. Also, we've been doing research for several years, incorporating by reference AMC's this thing about hell on wheels, about the railroads, okay? That 1 mile on each side of the line went to the railroad companies. They owned it. They controlled that. They controlled banking. They controlled redlining. We've brought this up to EPA. We've brought this up to the Environmental Justice League, and nobody. We've been doing primary research on it, and we're moving with litigation and other proposals. That we're talking about 10% of the land in the damn country, all right? And probably half of the value of the country. And as redlining went on, it permeates our society, and the fossil fuel oil companies, they got to go. They're threatening our life, our survival on this planet. Enough. Thank you. More later. Bye. Follow our podcast.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Cindy Nguyen.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you, committee members, and thank you, Chair Krakow. My name is Cindy Nguyen, and I'm a legal intern at the Natural Resources Defense Council. I joined my colleagues from NRDC and as well as our other partners here today to urge AQMD first to adopt the strongest possible rail yard and port ISRs this year, and second to deliver on the promise of the 2022 AQMP to achieve a zero emission future. I understand that this is a heavy ask. I understand that a zero emission transition is challenging and complex. I also understand the amount of work and effort it would take to realize this future. But I also understand that the frontline communities near the ports and rail yards are overly, disproportionately, and unnecessarily burdened with pollution, and immediate change is necessary for the health and safety of these communities. The emission sources at the ports and rail yards contribute to excessive amounts of particulate matter and ozone, which has led to an ever-growing number of respiratory conditions, heart attacks, hospitalizations, and premature deaths in the surrounding communities. We need the rail yard ISR passed in August and more progress on developing the port ISR to ensure it gets passed this year. We know that strong ISRs will save lives. The warehouse ISR that was passed in 2021 is already delivering significant improvements. The rail and the port ISRs can do the same. Please stand with the communities and pass both ISRs this year. The health of our communities is too important to stall or weaken these critical life-saving rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Lionel Mayers.
Yes, Lionel Mayers from the Sun Valley Area Neighborhood Council and a member of the Sierra Club San Fernando Valley group, speaking as an individual. I am calling today because I feel strongly that we need to clean up our air. Low-income communities such as my community live in areas that are heavily polluted with air pollution due to industrialization, railroad yards, and trucks. And we need to clean up the pollution that's impacting low-income, underserved communities such as mine and Sun Valley. And the particulate matter and ozone that these emissions sources contribute to are known to lead to more emergency room visits, more hospitalizations due to heart attacks, aggravated asthma, decreased lung function, restricted airways, and even premature death. Setting emission reduction targets requiring zero emission infrastructure and deployment and are great elements to include in this rule, but they must be strong enough to be effective. So I urge you to do the right thing to clean up our communities because low-income people suffer the most. Please, because our council members, elected officials need to hear our concerns. It is time for action, direct action now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And that closes the queue, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you to all the commenters. And again, urge staff to work with everyone, including our port partners and PMSA on some of this exemption language. We've heard staff presentation and asked clarifying questions and heard some public comment. I'll now bring this back to the committee members for any concluding comments or thoughts. Anything at this time from anyone? Yes, I'll just say a couple quick things. The mission of our agency is to clean the air and protect the health of all residents through practical and innovative strategies. When we look at sort of how to evaluate this measure, the measure is in our air quality management plan, which has gone up for SIP approval to EPA. We are supposed to include in that SIP, feasible measures that are defined as, quote, capable of being accomplished in a successful manner within a reasonable period of time, taking into account economic, environmental, legal, social, and technological factors. So that sort of governs how I look at this. We have all kinds of dirty Tier 0 locomotives running through our air basin. The locomotives are going to be an increasingly large percent of our smog problem. I think the estimate was 15, 20% or even more over time. We tried really hard last year to work with the rail yards and the Class 1s, BNSF and UP on an MOU. I think the board really stuck its neck out. Staff stuck its neck out trying to come to an accommodation to further our mission, further our AQMP, and address this problem with this dirty equipment in our basin. At the end of the day, Union Pacific backed out of that. And now Union Pacific sends us CEQA comment letters, concerned about the environmental impacts of our proposal. So there's really not much that more we could be doing. I'm supportive of this and looking forward to seeing it come to the board. We'll have to see how the language gets tweaked. There's both the emissions reductions piece of it and the infrastructure planning piece of it. I think they're both equally important. We want to see both of those carried through if possible. So it's been a real long haul to get here to this stage. I know this is set for hearing on August 2nd. We still have some work to do. But I do believe that the proposal is consistent with our mission and takes into account all the factors that we are considering. But I understand it's still a preliminary draft form, and we'll see how it ends up being tweaked before it comes to the board. So hope that that's helpful, staff. Anything further from any of the board members at this time? Okay, we'll go on to item 2, 2022 and 2023 Airports MOU Implementation Progress Report with Dr. Sang-Mi Lee. Staff will provide an overview of the progress in implementing measures in the MOUs for commercial airports for 2021 and 2022. These MOUs were approved by the board in December 2019 and extend through 2032. Thank you, Dr. Lee.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee and public. I'm Sang-Mi Lee, Planning and Rules Manager overseeing Airports MOU project. Next slide. So this Airports MOU is initiated as a control measure listed in 2016 AQMP. About a year after the adoption of the AQMP, board directed staff to pursue MOU-based voluntary approach for this sector. So we convened working group meetings, which had all the 5 airports representatives, airline representatives, and other stakeholders participated. At the same time, airports developed their own air quality improvement plan and measures. December 2019, these 5 MOUs were executed and measures got adopted. Next slide. So MOU is a collaboratory process between airports and South Coast AQMD. Airports are committed to complete certain types of actions to pursue emission reductions. And South Coast is committed to achieve emission reductions based on airports' action and pursue SIP credits for it. Next slide. MOU outlined three categories of measures. First one, ground support equipment. All airports included this measure in their MOUs, and this is the category that anticipated to bring the majority of emission reductions. So shuttle bus electrification is committed by three airports, Los Angeles, Burbank, and John Wayne. And there are other measures targeting the heavy-duty trucks, for example, incentive measures by Los Angeles and the fuel pipeline project by John Wayne. Next slide. There are two metrics to track the progress in GSE. First one is fleet average emission factors. So each airport developed their own target, and this target is specified in the MOU. These targets reflect airports' own the operational conditions. Therefore, target varies from airport to airport. For 2023, the target ranges from 0.93 to 2.20 gram per brake horsepower per hour. And again, this target is specified in the MOU. The other metric is emission reductions in tons per year or tons per day. This metric requires other factors such as emission factors and also the number of equipments and the number of hours that equipment operates. And this is the metric that we are going to submit to EPA for SIP credits. Next slide. The implementation of MOU is anticipated to bring NOx emission reductions, the amount of 0.52 tons per day in 2023. This corresponds to 53% reduction of the entire GSE emissions. For 2033, the emission reduction would be 0.37 tons per day. That corresponds to 67% of the entire GSE inventory. Aircraft not covered under MOU since they are primarily regulated by federal and international authorities. Heavy-duty trucks are not the main category for emission reductions either, since they are subject to South Coast warehouse indirect source rules and other CARBs rules. And then there are other regulations such as CARBs, the in-use off-road diesel regulation applied to equipment operating at airport as well. Next slide. So upon the execution of MOU and adoption of the measure, the board requested airports to provide updates on a semi-annual basis for the first 2 years. So the progress was provided to Mobile Source Committee roughly at 6-month frequency. MOU also defines very detailed requirements, reporting requirements. So all the airports are supposed to submit their annual progress report by June 1st of every year till 2032. This should include a detailed list of equipments, emissions, performance targets, etc. Over the 4 years of the implementation, all the airports submitted their report on time. Prior to discussing the airport progress, I'd like to have your attention on engine standard, emission standard for new engines. For off-road diesel-fueled equipment, there are 5 tiers, starting from Tier 1 through Tier 4 interim and Tier 4 final. Anything manufactured prior to Tier 1 is considered Tier 0. Tier 4 final being the cleanest available out there, it often has more than 20 times cleaner emissions than, sorry, my apology. I was looking at my screen. Okay, Tier 4 final often has 20 times cleaner emissions than Tier 0 or Tier 1. Gasoline and LPG engines have 2 tiers that are pre-2010 model year and post-2010 model year. Next slide. So the MOU brought quite significant changes in the fleet toward the cleaner engines. So 2017 being the base year of the MOU, representing pre-MOU stage, and 2022 being the latest finalized report. So over the years, the dirty Tier 0, Tier 1, shown as orange and yellow color, has decreased from 33% in 2017 to 12% in 22. At the same time, the bright pink color, Tier 4 final, increased to 50% of the entire fleet. Next slide. Gasoline and LPG engines has gone through similar changes. So pre-2010 engines shown in yellow color has decreased from 57% of the entire fleet to 22%. Same time, the cleaner engines increased its presence. These two plots showing the all 5 airports combined fleet. Next slide. So we'd like to present each airport progress in implementing MOU measures, but prior to that, there are several things to consider. First, each airport has its unique operational condition, such as building a new terminal buildings or their agreement with their communities, etc. So MOU targets were set to reflecting these unique operational conditions. And over the time, we improved the technical methodology to estimate emissions. This included improvement in operating hours and deterioration rates, etc. And most airports reported additional GSEs every year that were not identified in the MOU, except one airport, which excluded a large fleet of GSE that were originally reflected MOU. This specific fleet operates outside the airport perimeter for the majority of the time, but they come to the airport's lot approximately 2 months of a year. Next slide. So these are the changes of fleet size by airport over the time. And as you can see here, in 2022, the entire fleet grew almost by 1,000 pieces. This is well beyond the normal growth of this category, specifically considering the downturn during the pandemic. So this increased the GSE PC engines are due to some missing equipment inadvertently missed in the previous year's reporting and brought back to the database. This means that's improved accuracy. However, that poses challenges at emission tonnage reduction because the more equipment means the more emission. Next slide. So this graph shows that airports' progress over the time relative to the 2017 level, shown as 100% in blue bar. So all 5 airports over the time made a significant progress. In the latest 2022 report, the airport's emission factors are approximately half of the original level or about up to 60% of original level. Another point to have your attention here is performance target, shown as red solid line. So this represents the 2023 performance target specified in MOU. So 3 airports, Los Angeles, Burbank, and Long Beach met the target. However, John Wayne and Ontario are a little bit behind. Next slide. This is the change of emissions in tons per year unit. While airports made significant progress in emission factor-wise, there are challenges in materializing those progress into tonnage reductions. This is largely due to the growing size of GSE fleet. The last group, the Ontario, that I'd like to be your attention that this one reflects the exclusion of the specific fleet. That fleet roughly accounts for 47% of the MOU inventory that's shown is blue bar. Next slide. So the summary of GSE implementation-wise, there have been significant progress, but 3 airports met the target. However, 2 airports who has not met the target, we are working closely to facilitate them to meet the target. John Wayne indicated their likelihood of meeting the target in early this year. Next slide. There are other measures in the MOU for shuttle bus electrification. Los Angeles already completed the measure, and John Wayne and the Burbank showed operational challenges in implementing this measure. For heavy-duty trucks, Los Angeles Airport administered a $500,000 incentive fund to turn over to cleaner trucks. John Wayne eliminated fuel delivery trucks by installing jet fuel pipeline. And all the airports expressed challenges related with infrastructure, and this slows down the implementation of MOU measures. Next slide. So far, the implementation of MOU measures brought 195 tons per year of NOx reduction in 2021 and 181 ton of reduction in 2022. Our commitment is to achieve 189 tons of NOx reduction in 2023, and so far we are getting close to it. Next slide. Graphically representing the progress for 2021, this reduction represents 46% of reduction, and 2022 is 48%, and then our target is achieving 51% of reduction of entire inventory. Next one. So far, all this progress report and associated database are available on our internet. And working group meeting was held last month, and follow today's report, we will submit this report to EPA. This concludes my presentation.
Mayor?
Thank you very much. Could we go back to that slide, I guess 14? Maybe I don't know what slide it is. The changes in GSE emissions. Could you explain more about Ontario, since that's in my area, if you will, what the note at the bottom of that slide really means?
Thank you, Mayor McKellen, for your question. So Ontario has a specific operator that owns its own lot, its own facility outside the airport perimeter.
And that would be?
UPS.
UPS?
Yes.
Okay.
So when MOU was developed in 2018, 2019 timeframe, the airport included the UPS fleet and their emissions in the MOU. And then we understood their emission levels reflected in performance target. But then about 2 years ago, airport indicated that the UPS fleet is operated outside the airport perimeter, and airports has limited means to reduce emissions from the operator. So in the last 3 years, in this as shown in this plot, the UPS fleet is excluded in emissions calculation.
Anything further from other board members at this time? So we understand that this does not include the aircraft. Are we having discussions with EPA about the aircraft, or any sense as to what EPA is doing about that?
There are ongoing discussions that we're having with EPA and CARB as it relates to aircraft, and there's been outreach to FAA as well.
Thank you. Keep us posted on that. I know you will. We'll open this up for a public comment at this time, just for reasons.
Yes, Supervisor Mitchell has her.
Oh, yes. Go ahead, Supervisor.
I'm sorry, I got my hand up late. Quick question. Do we have any recourse in the event that airports just don't meet their targets?
Yes, Supervisor Mitchell. Good question. The MOU itself does include specific language on what to do if there is a dispute. Really, it just looks at a dispute resolution process as opposed to any sort of penalties or anything like that. And so it's really to just elevate the issue within the agencies and try to come to some speedy resolution. And we're doing that as necessary. And we have been having, I think, recently more productive conversations with Ontario. And so we're hopeful that we'll be able to resolve that.
Thank you.
Mayor?
Good, thank you. Along that line, is UPS on the airport subject to the warehouse indirect source rule?
Yes.
Okay, so they are under rule to reduce their emissions separate from the airport MOU, correct?
That would be correct, yes.
And it's great that Mayor Cowan is alert to these issues. Supervisor Hagman also is alert to our discussions with Ontario.
Yes, we've been in discussion with Supervisor Hagman with regards to operations at Ontario, and I'll be reaching out to the executive director at Ontario myself to talk about these. But Supervisor Hagman has also been of great assistance with us with regards to Ontario.
Oh, great. That's good to hear.
How about John Wayne? They seem to not be doing their part either.
My understanding is that John Wayne has made up its commitment, and so we're not as concerned with John Wayne. But I'm going to defer to staff if there's anything that I may have missed.
That is correct, Wayne.
Anything further from any of the board members at this time? Okay, we'll open this up to public comment. We'll do a minute on this item, if that's okay, Bay. And we'll open the queue now, please.
There are no hands currently raised.
Is there anybody in person anywhere? Hearing none, we'll close public comment and come back to the board members. Anything further at this time, board members? When does this issue come back to us? It's a yearly or every 2 years?
Typically, this is an annual report.
Okay. So we'll look forward to hearing updates on Ontario beforehand, and I know staff will be working with Ontario and Supervisor Hagman on these issues. That takes us to written reports, colleagues, items 3 through 5. Anybody have any questions or want to pull anything at this time? Any public comment on this one? Do we have to open that queue up? Let's open that queue for 1 minute on items 3 through 5. Is there anybody in person on these items? Anybody in queue?
No.
We'll close these items 3 through 5. Takes us to other business. Anything any board members would like to discuss at this time? Any public comment on other business? Item 6.
No one
Okay,
has their
we'll
hand
close
raised.
that item. We'll do open public comment. We'll do 1.5 minutes on this one. Open public comment, item 7. Let's please open the queue and alert folks in the rooms.
We have one speaker online.
Is there anybody in person on item 7, public comment in any of the locations today? Seeing none, we'll go to public comment online. Mr. Etter, you have 1.5 minutes. Good morning.
Hello, am I being heard?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, my name is Harvey Witter. I'm speaking for myself and for the Public Solar Power Coalition. As I've said, solar power is 20% less expensive, most cost-effective way to go. I want to incorporate by reference articles in the LA Times, one from a couple of days ago by Sammy Roth about the new executive officer for LADWP. And this woman was with Edison and PG&E before and stuff, okay? Hope to be working with her. We were consultants to Mayor Bradley in '78 from the gas company. Also, we were consultants in the late '70s, early '80s. The first black commissioner in DC on the low-income solar equity project. It was never evaluated by the state of this. Okay, this important stuff. So we've been working in this area for a long time. And so these articles, also there was one by Roth, and it said that rates have doubled in the last several years, and it's going to be, unless you look at public power, PG&E went bankrupt 2 times this century. Enough. There's going to be a taxpayer revolt from the ratepayers. Okay, that's on. Stuff's on. Also, rebuild the grids because of the electrification. We have ignored solar thermal, and that's a big problem. And like what the Israelis did out in the desert here, building 350 megawatts, Edwards Air Force Base, etc., and a third of the cost of what the power tower was.
Thank you, Mr. Etter. Any other public comment at this time, Wayne?
There is not.
Okay, so just alerting our colleagues, Mobile Source Committee is dark, and we don't have meetings in July. So the next meeting is Friday, August 16th. And we also don't have board meetings in July. So the next board meeting is August 2nd. Is that correct? Very good.
Yes.
Well, wish everybody a terrific days today. Supervisor, when is the big Juneteenth celebration in Carson?
You are kind, Mr. Chair. It is today at 4 o'clock, from 4 to 8 at Victoria Regional Park in the great city of Carson.
Terrific. I was able to attend the one last year, which was just awesome. And we'll try to get out there to Carson today. Thank you for that, Supervisor. I know that that event is really important to you. So everybody try to get out to Carson today, 4 p.m. And otherwise, have a very good weekend. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.